What's good? What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Urban Platform Speaks. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel as you tune in and check out the content. And with that being said, man, I want to speak on the NBA, and the reason why I'm making this video is because like the current product of the NBA, in my opinion, is not good, right? And they're trying to make you think that you're watching good basketball. But if you had an opportunity to watch basketball back in the 80s, back in the 80s, like I did, the 90s, and on up to the 2000s, the thousands, 2000s, and all that stuff, then what you're seeing right now is not good basketball, right? And then so it got me to thinking, like, how do we get to this point with the poor basketball play? And 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 I was thinking about this guy, what's his name? David Stern. David Stern is basically responsible for the basketball, the poor basketball play that we see right now. And if you take basketball from day one, like basketball was invented in I think 1891. Like the guy James Naismith invented basketball. And from 1891 to, let's say, 19 into the 1980s, like almost 100 years, it took all that time to perfect the game of basketball. Because they said the 80s, and I agreed. People say that the 80s were the golden era of basketball, right? So if the 80s was the golden era of basketball, like that's the best. Like that era right there, where you had Bird and Magic and Isaiah, and you had a young Michael Jordan, like that's the best that the NBA had to offer the world. And that right there is what excited the world. So what David Stern basically did is he took the best players from the NBA on what we thought as basketball fans, people in America, we thought that it was about like representing the NBA, and we knew that they were trying to expand the game and they was trying to sell the game, right, to the rest of the world, and it was about promoting the game. But basketball fans had no idea that like what his intentions were, like what he had to do in order to sell this game to the rest of the world, you know, as far as like the quality of play that like American basketball play or fans received in return. So like when you think about, like I said, that was the golden era of basketball. When you had Larry Bird in the league, Larry was doing his thing. Magic and Isaiah Thomas and all those guys, Karl Malone, Dave Robinson. Like the NBA back then, when those guys was playing, it was. I mean, you saw the best that the basketball, like basketball had developed into like the best. Like the coaches knew how to coach the game, they knew how to teach the game. Players knew how to execute because they had great coaches and they had studied the game. These players like Michael Jordan studied he liked David Thompson, right? So he watched David Thompson. He said he watched George Gervin. He watched who else? He watched Dr. J. And so when you think about that, so Dr. J, he watched guys like he get to see Bob Cousy, Jerry West, and the guys who played like in the 50s and the 60s, right? He watched Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, although he played with Kareem for a while. He watched Kareem and what was that? Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, right? Kobe Bryant said he studied. Who did he study? Golly, I forgot. But he didn't just study Michael Jordan. He studied his father, and guys from like who was a guy who I remember I forgot his name, but it was a guy who played like back in the 60s, played even before his father played, right? And Kobe Bryant studied him. So you got to figure by the time we get into the 80s, when you watching basketball, you watching like guys who played for great coaches like Dean Smith, John Wooden, John Thompson, like Bobby Knight. So these guys in the NBA, they had the best coaches coming through college and the best coaches who studied the game. Then you had guys like who managed what was the guy, Red Auerbach. So it's a lot of history there. So by the time you get to the 80s and these guys know how to play basketball and you watching that and the world is watching that, and that product is what the world wanted. Like what the NBA had developed into by the time they got to the 80s, like 90 something years, the world was watching that. And the world admired that and the world wanted that. So you had this guy, David Stern, he took, USA basketball on a sales tour. Basically, what it turned out to be, he took the best that the NBA had to offer. He put them on one team and put them in the Olympics and let them, basically be ambassadors for the NBA and the rest of the world. Every it's not like they didn't play basketball in Russia and China and Italy and all those other places, right? But they didn't play it to the level of what NBA players played it. They didn't play it to the level of what we was used to playing, right? So he sold it. All these guys had fans. Larry Bird had fans all over the world. Um, Charles Barkley, Clyde, John Stockton. So these guys, they was great representatives. Mike, Dave Robinson, everybody on this team that you like 92, that 92 Dream Team, all those guys just had a terrific basketball story individually. All of them had success on their teams, you know. So when they was on tour, man, they was like rock stars. And they did an excellent job. All these guys did an excellent job at selling the game and being ambassadors for the game. But nobody knew that like this guy, David Stern, was going to sell the world this game. And then in return, he was going to change the NBA. See, because in order to get right the rest of the world to fully buy into the game, he had to bring in players from around the world, right? And so when you bring in European players, Asian players, and players from any other part around the world, they still could not physically play the game the way players like American born players played it. Like they couldn't at the center position, they couldn't match up with Patrick Ewing, Dave Robinson, Karl Malone. Like you don't get nobody. And then on top of that, just bringing like you got a young Shaq who's just coming into the league. I think when the Shaq coming to the league, but like you don't have like centers and power forwards around the world who can match up with these guys, right? Not a whole lot. Now you did have like I don't, Hakeem Olajuwon is not American born, but he's like one of the few athletes or one of the few basketball players, foreign born basketball players as a center who came in and was able to compete and be a star in the league, right? So this league, the NBA needed guys to come over from other countries and be stars. So they had to change the league. They had to get rid of the center position. They had to get rid of the power forward position, and they had to change the point guard position because, like point guard, you can't like the world has never produced. I'm not even going. You has never got another point guard like Magic Johnson from nowhere else in the world. You have never got a point guard, and I can break it all down to you, right? You have never got a John Stockton, like a John Stockton type point guard from another country in the world. What you do get from other countries in the world is you'll get somebody who's six. They got to be at least like 6'8" to be a point guard because they can't do the things like what John Stockton did in the league. I think John Stockton's like 6'1", 6'2". He might be a little bit taller, but he wasn't a real tall guy. But he physical and he know the game. Man, like the best point, like they sent over, what was the guy, point guard they sent over? Ricky Rubio. That was an experiment that didn't work because Ricky Rubio could not match up with American born point guards. So basically David Stern had to water down the product and change the NBA. So now we're watching as NBA, like American NBA fans, we're watching more of a European style of basketball. And so they call it like positionless basketball because, with the way that they can't play it the way that we had developed this game over here in this country. So those foreign born European basketball players couldn't play it the same way. So they had to change the league. They had to change the way it was played. And so when you change the way it's played, it's not, and number one, it's not up to the quality of what it had developed into the 100 years that we had got to see. We didn't, we wasn't there for the whole ride. But like I said, by the time the 80s got here and what basketball had developed into because of guys like Jerry West, Bob Cousy, um, Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, by the time you got to the 80s, what the league had developed into, and the league just took off and it exploded. So, but the world, the rest of the world was still behind, right? Behind us because they couldn't play that style of basketball. You don't have guys like Shaq. Like when they brought Yao Ming over here, right, to compete against Shaq, Shaq just destroyed him. What was the other guy? And Yao, I like Yao Ming as a basketball player, but he couldn't stay healthy, and that wasn't his fault. What was the other guy who came over and later he came over from Russia? Sabonis, right? I don't recall his first name, but Sabonis was a good basketball player, but you could just tell he just wasn't like for the physicality that the NBA played with, like those foreign guys, the athleticism and the physicality, they just couldn't match up to that. And so now they had to take positions out of it so you can have positionless basketball. And so those guys could have success, right? But in turn, American basketball players are not really satisfied with that, especially if we got to see Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, um, man, and the product is just not the same. And the reason why it's not the same is because of this guy right here, David Stern, man. He sold the NBA out, and in turn gave American basketball fans. He just gave us an inferior product, and so I don't even think like maybe the rest of the world is happy with it and satisfied with it, but here, like ratings are down, ticket sales are down, like people not really watching the game like they used to. No more strategy to the game, and that's not the players' fault. It's the guys with the suits who sold this game and changed the game just for money, just so they can expand this game around the world. But we are not watching what I think like the guy James Naismith, like what he intended for this game to be, and what this game had developed into by like the 1980s when basketball really took off, and then you were seeing the best of basketball. Basketball peaked in the 80s, and then after it peaked in the 80s, David Stern just sold it out to the rest of the world, watered it down, brought in people who couldn't play the style of basketball that we're used to, right? And I'm not even really trying to knock like the foreign European basketball players or foreign basketball players at all, because if they had invented like a better game, or if they had was able to come over and compete and contribute in a way where it didn't affect the game that what we already knew, then that was cool. Just like I said with Hakeem Olajuwon, I don't think he's American born. I think he came here and went to college and he learned the game then, right? But Hakeem Olajuwon, they didn't have to change the game for him. He came in as, and he played the center position. That's his position, a center. He excelled at that. And so I guess as fans, we thought that anybody who came over from any other country, any foreign basketball player that came to America to play basketball, we was assuming that they would play our style of basketball player and play and what it had developed into over the years, right? But that's not it. Um, David Stern felt the need to change the game, water it down, and now, like I said, you got so they had to phase those positions out, and to me, it just looked like they phased it out because those foreign-born basketball players couldn't play the same style that Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas, and all those guys play. They just couldn't do it. And it's proven even to this day, even though you got a lot of foreign-born basketball players in the NBA, they still can't play that style of basketball. What we had gotten used to seeing, like when we peaked out in the 80s, what we had got, they would never be able to, they can't do that. At least not up to this point. They haven't been able to do that. So that's my rant, right? About this guy, David Stern. And I just want people to know that you are not watching like you're not watching right now the best basketball that has ever been played. Basketball like play has been on the decline, and it's only because David Stern just sold it out. It was all for money. It's more so about money than it is, you know, the game, the love of the game, And so, like I said, that's my rant. And I'm ready to push back on anybody who thinks that basketball today is anywhere near what it was in the 80s and in the 90s. Um, it's just not. The quality of play is not there from like it's just not. And anybody who wants, I'm gonna continue to make these videos too, right? And push back on anybody because it's not, you're not watching the same game. Definitely not. And it's showing by attendance and viewership and stuff like that. So that's my take on it. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Also, don't forget to leave a comment. And with that being said, man, I'm gonna check y'all out in the next video.